everyone, and good whatever wonderful moment of the day you are enjoying on your time zones, either now as you are here with us live or when you go back and enjoy the recording. My name is Minola Jacques. I will be your host for today. I am joined backstage by Jessa, who takes care of us, just making sure everything runs smoothly, as we will be spending 1 hour talking about ethical leadership and how a value based culture can align with organizational strategies. I would encourage all of you to drop a few comments in the chat. First and foremost, do let us know where you're watching us from. It's always great to see where Hacking HR touches minds and hearts and souls. And also, we always appreciate a sign that technology actually works. And then we will have an amazing lineup of speakers today. So Jessa, please help me bring them on stage. And while we get used to seeing our faces next to each other, I will say a warm, warm welcome. And let's make the most out of our time today. As I keep saying, Hacking HR hours tend to appear shorter than regular hours. So let's make the most of it. What I will do, I will pass the e-mic around for the intro round. Clockwise, that means Vinay, you will go first, and then Teddy, you will bring us home. And the first ask is quite simple. Just a short introduction, and then do let us know what exactly from this topic resonated so deeply with you that you decided to be here today. So what is so personally meaningful in ethical leadership and value-based cultures that you are here? So without further ado, Vinay, hello, so good to see you.
Hi, Manola. How are you doing?
Very well. Always happy when I see wonderful people on my screen.
Wonderful. Great. And I appreciate the question. So my background is I'm a people and organization transformation business partner. I'm a digital AI architect, but I'm also a behavioral scientist. And that's one of the reasons why I found this to be very intriguing and I wanted to come out and speak. In fact, ethical leadership, based a lot in the core components of soft skills, for the majority of this century, was not as prioritized as the technical and the hard skills. But about 2017, 2018, organizations, some of the biggest organizations in the world were touting that the biggest deficits that we have are the soft skills that tie into moral, ethical, civic leadership. And so coming out of the post-pandemic, I think this is priority one. And it's not only for the executive class anymore. It's for everybody.
Thank you so very much. Mary, it's been a while since we were in the same conversation. Good to see you.
Good to see you as well. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you all are at this time. My name is Mary Finch, and I am the head of people for an advertisement agency called Iris Worldwide, where, again, I'm the head of people and oversee all of the U.S. and South America. I am here in Chicago, just so I can tell you my time zone. So hello from Chicago. It's rainy and it's a little dark, but here we go. It's September. The reason why I wanted to join this panel is because of the title, ethical leadership, right? So it starts at the top. Sometimes we look at those that are boots on the ground to sometimes leverage things up and condition and make sure that they create the culture. But it really starts at the top. So it's about the values, the respect that leadership gives in the organization and how they build, their people to make sure that there's a culture, because culture equals people. So that's why I wanted to join this panel specifically today. And I'm looking forward to speaking with you all.
Thank you. Karen, welcome. Good to see you.
Hi, everyone. Good to be here. Thank you. I'm a management consultant, executive coach, author of Culture, Innovating Experiences at Work, and I'm a part-time instructor at Stanford Continuing Studies and LinkedIn Learning. So I typically use my expertise in coaching and developing leadership in their teams, culture, DEIB, employee experience, optimizing talent, and then transformation, which kind of cuts across everything to engage people for positive change in organizations. So the reason why I'm here is culture is a lot of what I do. I say over and over again that it's the thing behind everything. It reflects the true values of an organization. And beyond me being very, very values-based myself as a leader, it's very important that we have more of what's ethical than what's not. We'll talk more into that, but I think we need more of that in this world. We need the organizations to realize the impact they have and to be more intentional about making a positive difference in this world rather than eroding it. So I feel very strongly about this topic for that reason and much more, which I'm really looking forward to talking about with everyone here today.
Thank you. And it's so funny, just as you mentioned positive change, I saw in our chat that Liz managed to rejoin us. So Teddy, I will ask you to go, but you're not in the hot seat, not even in the first round. So please.
Great. Thank you so much, Mainola. So great to connect with you again and have this conversation. And hi to everybody. This morning, I'm joining from California, San Carlos, California. I am based in Nairobi, Kenya, but just traveled on a work engagement. I'm the Senior Director of People and Culture at Village Enterprise. And this topic is close to my heart because I'm currently studying doing a doctorate degree, and my topic is on ethical leadership. And so when I saw it, I just felt this is it. I must participate in this. And as John Maxwell says, everything rises and falls on leadership. So it really starts from the top, going down. And that's why it's important to have this conversation. Thank you. Back to you, Mainola.
Thank you. And Liz, welcome back. I keep saying that I won't be impressed with technology until I can download ice cream. So good to see you back here again.
I love it. Good afternoon, everyone. I had a moment with my camera, but I'm certainly happy to be a part of the panel. I'm Liz Gordine, and I have worked in human resources for the better part of 20 years, currently as a director of people operations. And I also offer some consulting and support from a mentoring perspective with the University of Tampa here in Tampa Bay. And to respond to your question, I think it's important for each of us to, simply remember that we can lead from any seat, right? For as much as leadership starts at the top, setting that example and the tone within any organization, I think another big piece of that is understanding that no matter your title, wherever you're seated in the organization, it's equal responsibility around presenting out our best foot, specifically tied to our ethical behaviors and how that aligns with, of course, the strategy within any organization. So I think I would probably echo everyone's sentiment here. I'm looking forward to a really great discussion around this very important topic. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. And as much as I am tempted to dive right into the whole topic of today, I will keep my curiosity in check for just a little bit longer and do something that I love doing in my everyday work, which is change work. And that is clarifying and demystifying the terms. Because we have servant leadership, we have purpose-driven leadership, we have this leadership, that leadership. Now today we talk about ethical leadership. And as much as almost self-explanatory this concept sounds, I am curious to see what facet of ethical leadership you bring into the conversation today. And what I will do, I will just use this secondary introductory round for you to test the speed of unmuting yourselves. And let's see who grabs the e-mic first. Let's see who wants to go first. Mary, shall we?
We shall. I need you to ask that question again.
What is ethical leadership, and how does ethical leadership come into landscape of so many other types of leadership and leadership concepts?
Yeah, I think, when I just think about ethics, I think about someone who brings themselves into the organization, right? So when I think about a skill, I think that skills are something that can be taught to, they can be trained on. But when I think about who a person is and their personality, DNA is not something that you can't transform that. You are who you are. And even if your resume is glowing and says how much of a kind person you are, it's not really left to what you say you are. It's really left to your actions and how people perceive you, right? So when I think about ethics, I think about how someone shows up as their whole self and is able to organically be able to get people to see the vision of their behavior from their actions, but then hear them because they're displaying their actions and replicate that in the organization. And that's where I go back to saying that people are people. We can talk about organizational culture, but the organization is only made up of the people. So if the people in there aren't correct, the organization itself will be disrupted. So that's where my mind sits with that.
Thank you. Karen, I saw you unmuted yourself, and then Liz, we will go to you.
Thanks so much. I'm just going to add on top of what Mary said and just express that for me, ethical leadership is characterized by a set of values and principles that elicits followership. So Mary's talking about so that people will come with you. Leaders are nobody without followers, all right, in a lot of ways. And so if the basis of their leadership is characterized by ethics, that becomes a key component of their visions as leaders, as well as the basis of their leadership. And that shows in everything they do. So consistently through their behaviors. And that brings other people along with them as well.
Thank you. Liz.
Yeah, and I guess I will just piggyback on both Mary and Karen here. And, because I think that ethical leadership is also, there's a component of it that's tied to being courageous. Because there are many instances where if you are operating from a space of integrity and, you have high ethics, and starting with organizations, that can sometimes put you in some pretty shaky ground, so to speak. So the ability to show up, and I think, Mary, you called this out just excellent. It's showing up as, who you are and staying true to who you are ethically, in addition to inspiring those around you to do the same, right? Because it's easy for us to kind of start within organizations and become a part of the status quo, so to speak. But as an ethical leader, someone who's principled, do you have the courage to stand in being courageous and owning your space? So I think that's another big part of that.
Mm.
Yeah, I'll jump over and just say that after what Liz has just said, being courageous, we haven't had that. And when we don't have that in an organization, then this stifles employee voice. If everybody's just following what somebody said because it's the popular thing or the thing that is trending because it stays true to it doesn't buck the trend, then everyone just follows into that line. And then you don't even hear about employees and other people's ideas. And then a leader may just say, well, I didn't hear anybody say anything different, so I guess everybody's just in line. So it's like a downward spiral. So I think coming out of this pandemic, one of the big things is having that courageous, right? We talk about brave space, safe space, all this stuff. Organizations need to consistently give that message. Saying it once a year on January 1st by an executive CEO and not saying it again, that's not enough. It has to be said over and over again, because for a long time, we haven't encouraged employee voice. And then I'll just say one other thing. So I'll just flip it all the way over back to what Mary had said. And that is, people have to bring themselves, but an organization is culture, right? Is a collective. So when corporations say people are our greatest asset, and then they report billions of dollars every quarter, but they go through multiple rounds of layoffs of 5, 10, 15, 30,000 people per layoff, the message. And so from an EX, employee experience behavioral scientist, and having pulsed decades and decades of the data of EX, why can't we move that 21, 24%, which is nothing to be proud of, right? In this modern society, it tells us that people are very disengaged, and that's different levels of disengagement. We've got to change that. So we can say great things, but then actions speak louder than words. And if words are speaking louder than actions, well, what do we have?
Just to add to what everyone has said, when you look at ethical leadership in terms of the theoretical bit of it, it's characterized in two different ways. One is the moral person, talking about the leader's character, the morality, how they make decisions. And then the other side is the moral manager, talking about just how the leader leads the followers in terms of decision making, communicating with the team, and ensuring that they are leading in such a way that can be trusted. They are distributing responsibilities appropriately, distributing the work effectively, and as well engaging everybody on board into the work that is required. And so just looking at both perspectives, the leader as a moral manager and how he leads, looking at the follower-leader relationship, and then the moral person as an individual, their character and the morality of the leader. Thank you.
Karen, I saw you briefly unmuting yourself. Do you want to add anything?
Well, I was going to let the conversation flow where it went, but I think you can't really talk about ethical leadership without kind of tying it to the organization. So I had some commentary on that. If we'll end up talking about that, I'm happy to put my 2 cents there. I have some very strong feelings about it.
Thank you so much. And I was listening to your answers, and for some strange reason, I got this flashback very early in the pandemic and in the lockdown. There were some conversations with how can we now make people understand and live in our values when they are working from home and they don't see the posters with our values on the elevator wall. Now, thankfully, we moved away from that fear. But let's acknowledge for a moment that, we live in a reality of remote work and hybrid work and connecting with each other online in a significant part of our work life. So what I would really want to dive a little bit deeper into is how can leaders still display and nurture a value-based culture with all these disconnecting realities around us. I don't know, Karen, if this is where we can plug in your thoughts. Happy to take some time now. Yeah. Okay. So please lead us into this, and then the rest of you know the drill. The unmuting competition officially open. Just build your conversation. So Karen, please.
All right. Thank you so much. Let me just start by saying, even getting back to the fundamental definitions, is ethics. It's not just about credibility or reputation. As far as I'm concerned, it's also about legitimacy. Right. Mm-hmm. Illegitimate businesses, they don't follow the rules. They're illegal. So there's like a line that gets crossed. And so that to me is like the baseline, but I'll take it even further with the notion that the bar should be even higher than fundamental or basic ethics. You know, we know that there are times where regulations are surprisingly not updated when they should be. And there are things that are legal but not necessarily ethical. So, for example, bad management is not illegal. We can argue whether it is moral, right? Or going bankrupt because of the cost of healthcare is not illegal. But I would argue both are not good in a moral sense, right? And so it's up to an organization to establish and live up to their version of ethical, and they need to be intentional and consistent about it, as I've already pointed out, to the point that they're even willing to make less money because of it. So that's the courageous piece that Liz was talking about earlier. When it comes to this return to work, return to office, hybrid or remote, you know, and even the layoffs that was mentioned earlier, a lot of this is driven by decisions. Okay, so how do you continue to communicate or display ethical leadership or ethical cultures? It's by the decisions that are made. Those happen regardless of the modality of work, let's just say, right? So for me, the way you continue to cultivate that ethical culture with ethical leadership, regardless of where people are working, it has to show up in the kinds of decisions that they're made and how those decisions are based upon these ethical values that everyone talks about but doesn't necessarily live up to. So hopefully that answers your question.
Thank you.
Okay.
I can go.
Oh, okay, go ahead, Mary.
Sorry.
Let's do this alphabetically. So Mary, you go.
Thank you. My head is like, it's hard to lock down one idea, to be honest with you, because I'm thinking about so many things. And Karen, clearly you have a POV. Clearly you do. So all good. But I thought about a few things, and decision making is key to this, right? It's the decisions that we make that attribute to the reactions and then the final actions that happen to people when it came to layoffs. And I think, and it was something in there that you said, Manola, in regards to like, you know, a disconnect. I feel like from the point of like COVID and coming back, like, of course, this was this whole new world that we stepped into, that we realized that we can do things and we don't necessarily have to be in person in order to get the work done. Wonderful. The introvert in me is excited. I was really kind of excited about the fact that, I get to be in my own space. But one of the things is being an HR leader and being someone that is connected, not finding a ways to disconnect, because it's easy to think about how you're disconnected. It's more complicated to think about how do you connect with people, and connecting with people equals relationships. So what we didn't know much about people is that they just came to work. We didn't know how they live. We didn't know all the complexities that came along with them because they were a person doing a job. And then we realized in coming back virtual that, people have children, they have families. How can we be more compassionate? How can we be more empathetic? You don't want to, look like the, someone that's not empathetic in leadership. So then we started to have a bit of sensitivity. And I wonder sometimes, with being on the end of someone that had to lay off several people, since coming back from off of my own parental leave, which is, it feels like a total burnout to me, to be honest with you. I wonder if some of those decisions where they saw things as they were happening, but they got so connected to people that the bad decisions started not to make decisions. I'll say that. And the result of not making those decisions created financial implications that happened to the business. And when it got to a point that now we're at the end of the year, or coming close to the end of the year, or 6 months into the year, now those decisions had to be made. And those same people that they saw and now know things about, where they held off, now it's made it even worse because now they had to lay them off. And that's just a response to the non-decision making that was made that became a bad decision. So saying a whole lot, but again, my head started spinning when you started talking about this, Karen, and then just hearing how disconnected. But as an ethical leader, and we talk about values, the one thing is, if we're dealing with people, we are not dealing, because dealing is to put up with, but if we're interacting with people and we have a pure compassion with how we want to run our business, because we can't do it without people. We have to learn what motivates people. We have to learn how they operate, how they function. And that's where really ethics kicks in for me. I'll pause. I said a lot.
Thank you, Mary.
I'll just continue on with that. Ethical leadership is supposed to make decisions based on organizational values, right? Companies have missions and visions and stuff like that. They have core sets of values. But then we see this kind of decision making constantly in the news that don't align with maybe the corporation's missions and visions and say, I mean, it's all right there. A corporation has these things. It's in every single handbook, whether you're a junior person coming in right out of college, fresher, they call them, or you're the CEO, an executive C-suite, the available mission, vision, core values and statements, and those things are there. And then bad decisions are made. It's just that when we were discussing this about 2 minutes ago, my mind remembered the Wells Fargo, right? The credit card. Everybody knows about it. So, how did that even occur? When corporations and executives, businesses make decisions based on fast, short-term thinking, right? And we're in this hyper speed world. We have a actual global culture moving faster into faster short-term thinking. This is part of the, there's a very famous yoga teacher who's a fantasy guy. Okay, so his name is Yoda. He says you have to unlearn what you've learned. When we look at ethical and moral leadership, a lot of that is putting people and organization and global priorities over profits. And quite frankly, that does reap the rewards far more exponential. But do we have strategic, reflective, design thinking decision makers? Or are we consistently developing, saying one thing and then move faster from the top all the way down in the organization and vendors and everybody else? Well, then we're eroding it. So moral, ethical leadership has to be worked on. And it has to be earned by working hard and steadily at it. And so that's just what I was thinking.
Yeah. And if I could overlay that with the culture piece, because culture delineates what's acceptable, not acceptable, or condoned, right? So when you talk about these case studies, and I'll say that I was a victim of the Volkswagen diesel scandal. You look at these and you'll see that culture said it was okay, right? This behavior was acceptable. And so that's why I love the title of this panel, because it kind of brings all these elements together that really have to reinforce each other. And if they don't, that's where the illegitimacy comes in. So I just wanted to throw that in on top of it.
Yeah, and just to connect on that, I wanted to add that really it's about the people. We are talking about the organization, yes, and the leaders, and it has to start with what the leaders accept. It said that your organization your culture is as good as the bad behavior you accept to run within the organization. And so if the leaders are not living their values, because it has to start with the personal values that I bring in as an individual, and then lead by those values, connecting with the organization, mission and vision. And so we have to just, as leaders, it's a work in progress that we must walk the talk and not just say it, but be seen to be doing it, and fairly across the organization. Because the other danger is that you make one decision based on who the person is concerned, and then something else comes up, and then make a different, decision based on the individual, probably a lower level staff. And so we have to be seen as leaders really intentional about making decisions the right way, being fair about how we make those decisions, looking at integrity, and really following the policy and the mission and that core value that we want to drive within the organization, which brings up to the culture. Thank you.
That's right. And I'll also say this. Liz, you want to go ahead?
Yeah.
No, I was literally just going to co-sign everything here, because I think one thing to remember is, and at least from my vantage point, is COVID highlighted for many organizations who they were. Period. You know, we could overanalyze that, but just to keep it simple, if you were an ethical, empathic organization, it showed. Regardless of your lack of being prepared for a pandemic, because how do you do that? But the core of who you are as a business, as an organization, and who your people were exposed during that time. And more importantly, I think the question you kick this piece of the discussion off around is, what are we doing now? Again, the spotlight is on that. I mean, we've got hybrid teams, we've got folks that are completely remote, we've got folks in the office. How are you leading from a space of empathy as it aligns with being ethical? And for me, it's all people driven. Mary, it's very important, as you mentioned, for us to know our employees. It should not have taken a pandemic for us to know that, Bob is a single dad and he's got 2 kids that he has to take care of or have to have special working hours, because now instead of taking my kids to school in the morning, they're at home with me all day because everything's shut down. And are we conducting those post-pandemic, if you will, touch points with our employees to continue to wrap support around them and to offer them, support as needed? So I think all of those elements tie into that ethical mindset where it is just who we are. The business or the organizations that we are a part of either enhance that are not, right? Depending upon their moral compasses and what they align with, ethically. So I, from my chair, I don't think, with us having this conversation around ethics, I think that's a very important piece of it, but it's all of these other things that we need to check the box around that are equally important. I know we've talked about being courageous and compassionate and empathic and showing integrity. It's this bundle of just, adjectives that align with being ethical. So just wanted to jump in and share that.
Thank you. Vinay, please.
Well, I was just going to say that this moral and ethical leadership that we're discussing, we had this mindset that the technical leadership is the hard stuff. That's the more difficult stuff. It's actually not. That stuff can be readily, and today it's mass adopted very quickly. Ask any Gen Z or millennial. The moral and ethical is the hard stuff. And it takes slow drip consistency, because what ends up happening, and if anybody is listening and is saying, well, what could be, we're talking about these things and how does it really matter to, what are the biggest implications of when a consistent slow drip of immoral or unethical leadership consistently happens within a culture, then you have things like that Wells Fargo, and okay, it's credit cards, it's fake bank accounts. Hey, it's money. But then let's just take it to the nth degree. We had a few years ago a Boeing scandal. And what happens when a culture, once again, prioritizes speed and profits over slowing down and making sure I's and T's are crossed and dotted? Quite frankly, lives can be lost. So I actually did a research paper with a team on what Boeing, that whole thing went down. I don't have to explain it to you. Everybody on the planet knows about it. But if you look back at what that really looks like, and if anybody were to look at the research, it comes down to moral and ethical or lack thereof for not just one or two decisions, because it doesn't happen in one or two decisions. It's a culture of removing and eroding ethical and moral. And so it takes time. Just as erosion happens, so does building. And so to build ethical and moral leadership into a culture takes time and hard effort. And so accountability.
Well, we are 5 minutes into the second half of our time together today. And I hear quite a few keywords popping up again and again: ethical and moral leadership, and organizational strategies, and value-based culture, and employee experience is one of them. And I got this question forming in my mind as we went. There are three come to mind very easily: big ticket items, DEI, mental health, sustainability. And somehow I feel that they are right at the core of this conversation. And I would invite you, if we can take a few minutes, and you can look at this holistically, or you can pick one of these that speaks most to you, and talk a little bit. What is ethical leadership, and what is a moral culture that really nurtures and augments these topics? And Liz, I would invite you to go first in this round, if that's okay.
I think with the DEI piece, it probably jumps out at me, initially, primarily because of the inclusion element, right? Ethical leadership and how we make that practice applicable to any organization. We want to make sure everyone feels included. Everyone's invited to the party, so to speak. So, when I think about it from that perspective, again, I would have to go back to the opening comments around leading from every seat and setting that expectation, and folks not only being held accountable by the organization, but where is your own moral compass? That self accountability that you can kind of tap yourself on the shoulder to say, hey, that may not be the right decision, or how am I responding to this, or how am I adding value here? I think it's a gut check for each of us around around that piece of it from an inclusionary perspective. That just initially jumps out at me. And then, from the sustainability perspective, I think that with that, organizations really need to consider, their best practices now. Are they working? Is this something, and I've heard us reference the Wells Fargo piece a couple of times here. Are our actions now, are they contributors to our long-term sustainability from an ethical perspective? If you cannot answer yes to that question emphatically, that is a much larger discussion that needs to be had, right? You need to have those conversations internally, just to keep this conversation top of mind with leaders and with employees. And it should not only be conversations that we're having, but I think someone led with this too. How are we actioning that? How can people see that we're being deliberate and intentional around these efforts? And what does that look like? It's not just a meeting or a check the box or a survey, but how can I actually see, and how can employees feel that the actions being taken, the impact is being felt across the business? So, I think, just along those lines, just an initial response. So thank you.
Just to add to what Liz has said, and really looking at the sustainability bit, I like what she said earlier, that organizations that really have COVID came to reveal the reality of what organizations really are, or who they really are. The more the more you make certain decisions that are not right, eventually it gets exposed out there. It may be an internal culture building up slowly at different levels of leadership. Eventually, it brings the whole boat down, you see. And so looking at that, it's really important, even when we talk about inclusion and, diversity and all that conversation. It's really about how are we making decisions on a daily basis as leaders. And it's okay not to have the answer as a leader. And I think that's where sometimes we miss it. You feel the urge or the push that you must make the decision. It's okay to consult, as Mary was saying, involve others, collaborate, involve other team leaders, involve other staff, other employees, so that the right decision can be made depending on the situation, so that leaders don't feel like I must take a decision, because sometimes that's what happens. They feel like I must make this decision, and if I don't do it, the buck stops with me. Well, that's true, but it's okay to collaborate. It's okay to check with others what's the right way to do this, because we don't have all the answers. Yeah.
So I'll just jump in and say, Manola, when you were asking those three, I see all three of those hand in glove, right? And so I'll just start with the D&I, which is ESG anyways. If we have an organization and it is not diverse and it is like vanilla, one flavor, if you will, then, whose morals and ethics? Whose? Right? It's not indicative of the United States. If we're just talking the United States is a melting pot of people. But if the organization and then if it is, if we have ethnic and diversity representation, but not at the top one or two executive levels, which are making the policies and the decisions, then whose morals and ethics, right? So there's that. So if you don't have a diversity of thought and you don't have a diversity of responses and voices, then you're missing gender ethics. You're missing ethnic morals, and then it goes all the way down to the non-policy. Well, they're policy, but I'll be honest. If I look at my career as a South Asian first generation American, right? Parents are from India. I only got to use a floating holiday pre-pandemic. I never was able to take off any of those Asian holidays. Parents would have asked me, aunts, uncles, no, don't have that off here. But and now we have that, right? We have floating holidays, so people can take holidays and vacations that are based on what their ethnicities are. So, I mean, that's not that's an important thing, but just go all the way to the top and consider people, when women had to, if we go back 15, 20 years ago, were women able to take off time after they had a child? I know a lot of women that might say, you know what, I didn't get any time off. That's tough stuff. So that's my contribution to that.
Thank you.
Yeah, if I could just share my train of thought about all of this. And I love how this is a very diverse panel as well. We have just a little bit of a different take on everything, but I think in totality, hopefully this is giving everybody a lot to think about. But when it comes to DEI, mental health, and sustainability, each of these, and they all reflect the values and the ethics, right, of an organization. And ultimately communicates, does a business care about people and the role they play in this world? Yes or no, pass or fail, right? When there is a lack thereof, it creates a dissonance in the people who may have a different moral compass than, say, the organization. And so when you think about employees, when they get this dissonance, and they start to raise questions of, why should I contribute here? Why should I spend my career here? Why should I help this organization be successful? And that's where you lose, because typically, people who are the whole package also, the greatest leaders are the most ethical, right? The people that perform, ideally should have the best morals and ethics, and they're not going to stay. You're not going to retain top talent. So I want to connect the dots there, because all of it, and I talk about reflecting and communicate. These decisions or lack of decisions that are made every day contribute to patterns of behavior that create a culture and a perception around what leaders are perceived to be, even if they don't intend it to be that way. And same thing about organizations. So that's why I said it goes beyond just reputation and credibility, because at a certain point, then you cross that line into whether or not it's legitimate. Should they exist, right? So
thank you, Mary. My heart goes out to you. It's so difficult to come in last now.
It's all right. When you have your own brain, you can think. So it's all good. Everybody said it wonderfully. I agree that you asked one question, and we all, even though we tapped on a theme, we all said it very differently. But I will say this in simple. I'm going to take it from the point of an organization. If you are doing the same things that you have done 5 years ago, 4 years ago, 3 years ago, even 2 years ago, you are not sustaining as an agency or as a company. You have to have some change. Even if you were thriving in a space of D&I, something should have made you raise the bar as you looked at mental health, as you looked at inclusion, as you looked at trying to sustain or retain employees. The one thought that I had in regards to, just as a leader, speaking from a point of view as a leader myself, it's a selfless act. So you have to you have a platform as a leader to include yourself into some of the things, because you have a voice. Myself, as an African-American woman, I have a voice and a platform to be able to use that. But as a leader, you have to think about everybody, not just as you think about race, but also as you think about mindsets, having diversity in mindsets, and making sure that, and I'll say that's why I dislike referral programs, because those referral programs basically bring in the same type of people. You're around the same type of people that think like you. So it doesn't become very diverse. You just have a group of people that become very segregated. And now you have groups of people that think the same way. But I go back to what I originally said. If you are an organization and you are doing the same things, having the same policies, have not looked at, adjusted, edited, start to do listening circles and hear from your people, and you're doing the same things that you have done, you are not sustaining, and you will not sustain as an agency or a company. With that, I will go to mute.
Thank you all, and sadly, we are very, very close to wrapping this conversation up, but we still have minutes for an amazing round. Now, Teddy gave us a small technical heads up in the chat. So what I will do, I will ask her to go first, and in case you need to drop off, then we will go agile, not fragile from there. So here's the question. We gave people so much inspiration and so much energy and hopefully so much courage to tackle this topic. How can we make it practical? So for everybody listening, where can they start to think about ethical leadership, role modeling it, and leading from each seat, as Liz said a few times today? And you will get extra points if you can also say that this is not one of those HR thingy, and it's not an HR's exclusive mandate. So Teddy, please lead us here. We hope that we can have you with us for the rest of the conversation, but we will take as many minutes with you as we can.
Sure, that's a great question. And I would say, yes, as we said, everyone is a leader at their level, from the lowest level cadre staff. They are leaders. Every one of us is a leader. And so how do I do it in my own way? how am I working my time? It's about personal values. What are my values as an individual? And am I bringing those to work with me?
Well, I think that was a great punchline. Let's see who wants to take it from here. Karen, I saw you unmuted.
Yeah. So the book I mentioned earlier actually shares a framework called Design of Work Experience. It's a co-design framework and process that can be applied to a lot of different focus areas, from DEIB to engagement to innovation. But it can also enable an organization to design, implement, and sustain an ethical leadership and culture based on values and aligned with employee experiences. So I really, I think I heard design thinking mentioned earlier. It's actually, the framework is based on 4 main components: design and change processes, enabled by capability and engagement, and across 5 phases with 12 learning loops. It supports organizational self-awareness and an approach that is intentional, mindful, and more importantly, meaningful to an organization. So I think you mentioned leaders that feel like they have to have the answers all the time. This is one way in which you can use something like, we need to exude an ethical organization. Let's work together. How do we bring the organization closer together through this journey by which we become known as being one of the most ethical companies out there, as an example? So there is some practical application there. And I think it's typical to say, okay, implement this or have that conversation or adopt this policy. And those are all potentially action steps that can support a larger strategy, but it needs to be more holistic than that. And hopefully this book, Culture Your Culture, can help with that as well.
Liz.
Yeah, I would like to just go back to, calling out the importance of, just continuously evaluating and evolving and improving. I think, there are so many different facets as it relates to ethical leadership and its principles, and just having the conversations and just showing up as the best version of who you are and contributing, that's critical. And again, I have to continually go back to Mary's opening comments around showing up and being who you are authentically. That goes so far because it sets the organization up for success. If there are 10 seats around the table and we're all showing up as the best version of ourselves from an ethical perspective, I mean, you can't go wrong. And we're challenging each other to have those conversations around continuous improvement and how we can evolve the organization. So I think that that's very important. Great conversation.
Mary or Vinay, how should we go? Let's do Mary and then Vinay, if that's okay.
All good. So just to highlight, and I'm going to highlight what Liz just said about the continuous improvement and making sure that we continue to have the conversations. I think that it's okay to just, gut check, and leaders get with employees and just have open discussions roundabout to talk about, how things are going, surveying your organization to see what are some of the thoughts as you move forward with action planning in your organization. I'm a firm believer in executive coaching too, just making sure that the coaching piece is there, having someone as a third party come in to have the conversations with you to help kind of align. I mean, people can show up, authentically, but sometimes when they show up, the values in which the organization is, the values of the organization and the way that the person aligns sometimes won't mesh. And that's fine too, because then that's a clear, it's a clear indicator of how there needs to be a change, right? But I do think that, just continue the conversations, continuous improvement, for employees, continuous, having like performance evaluations and having the conversations about how people are doing. And I'm talking about just thriving as an organization, thriving as a person, and again, just highlighting the word continuous improvement. So that would be my close.
Yeah. And continuous improvement, change management, a lot of these organizational tools are very key and they're needed. But for example, for reference, I wrote a Future of Leadership book just this year. And my final chapter is honesty and ethics. And I wrote a lot about the components that are needed in the post-pandemic. Things like altruism, civic virtue, peacemaking, sportsmanship, patience, and lots of other stuff. So the book is called Finding Self-Motivated Engagement in the Hyper-Driven World of Work. I wasn't planning to plug my book, but thanks for Manola for asking about the reference. So there it is. And so that's a brand new Future of Work, Future of Leadership 2023 book. And so it's got a lot on honesty, ethics, and how to show up as the individual. So business partner superstar.
This is absolutely wonderful. And well, we have a handful of more minutes, and I will just squeeze in one last question. But this question will be your question, because here it is. Is there anything very meaningful to you that you want to highlight in our conversation? And, you know, throughout our flow, the opportunity just didn't naturally pop up. So please consider that you just got asked the question that you've always waited for, and just highlight something that is very, very meaningful to you. I will give you a few seconds to think about that and to word it. In the meantime, I will just say a big thank you to everybody taking the time and the curiosity to spend this past hour with us. And let's do this. Well, let's do this as we started. And clockwise, Vinay, Mary, Karen, Liz, and then Terry. So Vinay.
I'll just say this, what popped into my mind. 2021, DEI was the #1 agenda for the executive class. 2022 was number 3. 2023, it fell off the top 5. If we don't bring moral, ethical leadership back into the priorities, DEI and B will continue to fall down.
Thank you.
Okay, so on a wish list, if I had to ask the question, and the question is about reflection, my question would be, I'll say to organizations. My question would be, what have you learned from this year? And what would you do differently with what you've learned and moving forward? That would be my question. That would be the start.
Thank you. Karen.
Yes. So as a disciple of appreciative inquiry, one of my favorite quotes is, "Our worlds are formed by the questions we ask." And so I'm so glad I'm following up Mary, because she did lead with a question and a challenge to everyone out there to think about. And I think having heard the word discussion, talk about, collaborate, come up a number of times in this conversation, it reminds me of the need for these strategic conversations that lead to impact and outcomes. And so in the same way an organization might take SWOT, SWOT, I would actually plug SOAR, which is a framework that talks about strengths, opportunities, aspirations, and results. And if we're able to bring all that together, we can bring it to life. This is more than about the conversation. It starts with those questions, but it leads to hopefully transformational change. So I just wanted to leave it at that.
Thank you. Liz.
I think just as a quick look back, questions for the organizations and even for ourselves, have you sought feedback? And based on that feedback or perspective offered, what have you learned and what is your action plan? How do you plan on actioning it? I think that's something that in organizations, that's a gut check for organizations as well as individuals. So that would be my question.
Thank you so very much, everybody. It's been an amazing hour, and these last minutes just felt like a great gift on top of everything. And thank you, Jessa, for taking care of us. A big thank you to Enrique for creating the opportunity. And if we have Terry, please, your punchline.
Thank you, and apologies for the technical challenges. I think my one thing from this conversation is something that the Starbucks CEO has talked about in a podcast, and I would ask, how can we do simple better? Cutting across the entire organization, from the leadership to the last, to everybody in the organization. How can we do simple better? And bring out the very best, even while we are doing it ethically across the organization. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. It's been a heartwarming conversation, and I'm looking forward to welcoming you tomorrow for another panel. But this one is definitely a blockbuster. So thank you, Mary, Karen, Liz, Terry, and Vinay for taking the time and the energy. So deeply appreciated. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye, everybody.